out of the Earth's shadow during Northern Hemisphere winter. But if ever someone says that the sun's certain to rise in the east tomorrow, remember that, because it's empirical proof of David Hume's argument that induction, that just because something's happened 1,000 times doesn't mean it'll happen the same way the next time, that David Hume's skepticism about induction is well-founded. So, given that I'm certain I'm right, it's my task to explain to you why I'm certain I'm right. And then also, even if I do convince you that I'm right, I have to explain why are all these other people wrong. They're not dumb. They're making a study of the situation just as I am. Why are they thinking differently? And also, if you run across someone who's following them who thinks differently, what are the arguments that you can quickly deploy to convince them that they're wrong and that you or I am right? And so I suppose I should start with the end, with the question of why are so many people holding on to these wrong models? And here I blame Milton Friedman, former professor, the late Milton Friedman, longtime professor at the University of Chicago, head of the Chicago School of Economics. Then he developed some sense and moved to the Bay Area, got a post as a teacher at Stanford, lived in North Beach, I lived in a nice tower with a good view of the ocean. I'd go down and have coffee with him occasionally, et cetera, et cetera. I blame Milton Friedman because he made things much, much too simple. That his idea was you should simply stabilize the money stock via open market operations and keep the economy's money stock growing smoothly, and then everything will be fine. There'll then be no shortage of aggregate demand, and you don't need to worry about this income expenditure framework or these Keynesians or this fiscal policy or this banking policy stuff. But all you have to do is stabilize the money stock, and the world will be fine. Now, why did Friedman think this? Well, I think there are two big reasons. The first was that if you look back from, say, 1980 or so back into the past, it is the case that times when the money stock is unstable are times when there are depressions, and times when the money stock is stable are times when there are no depressions. Although you could argue over whether instability of the money stock was cause or effect. Milton Friedman thought that instability in the money stock was a cause of the depressions. Bunches of other people thought it was the effect. They argued back and forth. What I think made Friedman certain that instability of the money stock was the cause was the fact that he was in general a committed libertarian. Not just an economic libertarian, not just a believer that the government shouldn't be interfering in the marketplace in prices and quantities, but also a social libertarian, a believer that the government shouldn't be sticking its nose into people's bedrooms or into their drug-taking habits, or into their ideas to pursue better living through chemistry or whatever. And if you do that, well, then you have a certain conceptual problem if you're a macroeconomist. You want to say that that government is best that governs least. Establish property rights, set up some courts to decide things if people dispute, otherwise just get out of the way. But if you have this complicated macroeconomic income expenditure system by which the government is always having to intervene to rebalance financial markets to avoid mass unemployment, that doesn't fit with your picture of the way that the world works. And so you say that's got to be wrong. Let me look for a simpler framework that would allow me to understand why it is that sometimes the government's interventions in the economy look like they've actually been good. And what he arrived at was the empirical finding that whenever the government had intervened in such a way as to keep the money stock stable, well, then things looked pretty good. And he generalized this to his constant money stock growth rule. Say only if the money stock grows smoothly will things do well, and all the other stuff, all the other bells and whistles is unnecessary. Now, this isn't a terribly, terribly comfortable position for a libertarian to be in, because you do have the government intervening in the money market constantly, buying and selling bonds for cash all the time to offset whatever changes in the supply of money are generated by private agents' transactions. But Friedman thought it's good, it's simple, it's a bright line rule, it's easy for the government to do. Let's say you do that and you can ignore all this other Keynesian stuff. And so Milton Friedman acquired a lot of followers behind his constant money stock growth rule in the second half of the 20th century. And then starting in the 1990s, it becomes apparent that it's simply not true. We have lots of central banks that follow Milton Friedman-esque prescriptions, right, that try to say we're just going to keep the money stock growing constantly in the economy, and that will avoid big depressions. And you have big depressions. And so then what do you do when you've been taught for 50 years that all of the Keynesian, Vixelian, Fisherian macroeconomics is wrong? All you need to do is follow a constant money stock growth rule. And then lo and behold, it turns out that following a constant money stock growth rule doesn't help you in late 2008, that the unemployment rate heads up to 10%. And at this point, you can do two things. One, you can say, oops, we've been followers of Milton Friedman for 50 years, and we were wrong. His intellectual opponents were right. We have to go back and listen to them and learn what they had to say and change our minds. And the other thing to say is, well, we know that the kind of alternative income expenditure approach was wrong. Milton Friedman taught us so. If there's something wrong with his theory, there must be something we haven't considered. We have to add something else to Milton Friedman's model. Something else is going wrong. Let's run out and see what it is. And it turned out an awful lot of economists decided to follow the second road. That rather abandoned monetarism for its competitor, for its more demand-oriented income expenditure competitor. They began running around and acting like the successors of Ptolemy, saying, gee, the normal terracentric model doesn't properly describe the motion of the planets in the sky, but maybe I can add an extra epicycle, an extra equant, an extra deference in order to make the model work. And so you have a lot of economists finding themselves trying to think complicated issues through on the fly from scratch, even though there's a perfectly good theory of why we're undergoing a recession, a theory that dates back to 1829, and John Stuart Mill and Jean-Baptiste Say, at least in its original form, waiting there for them. So let me run through what these schools are, and why people believe in them, and why they shouldn't. The first, and this Niall Ferguson of Harvard is a big booster for it, Tyler Cohen at George Mason is a pretty big booster of it, is the idea that we have high unemployment now because our educational system has failed. And we in America have produced 12 million workers who effectively have no skills. Right? That they don't even have the skill or perhaps the mental discipline to stand behind the cash register and make change and keep people from shoplifting at the 7-Eleven. That they're too bored or too inattentive or whatever. And so we can't find a job for these 12 million people to do at which they have a positive marginal product, or perhaps at which they're worth more than the minimum wage. People following this line say maybe we should shrink the minimum wage. And the comparison is between, say, the coming of computers and the decline in manufacturing and agriculture on the one hand, and the labor force, and the coming of the horseless carriage on the other. That is, back in the late 19th century, America had kind of one horse per person. Right? Horses were extremely useful. You can ride them. They can pull things. You can put them on a treadmill and make them walk on the treadmill, and it can drive some grindstone of one sort or another. So we had an awful lot of horses. Then we developed alternative technologies: steam power, diesel engines, gasoline engines, electricity, and all of a sudden the marginal product of nearly every single horse who had existed was zero. Horses are now useful only for entertainment, for exercise, and for crowd control and intimidation. When the police really want a crowd to see that they're not just facing a human being, even a human being with a gun, but they're facing a really large animal with really heavy feet and very sharp hooves that could kick really, really hard. Most of the horses we had in the late 19th century, bring them back and they would have zero marginal product in our economy. Why, Neil and Tyler ask, can't we conclude that the same isn't true of the 12 million excess American workers who are now unemployed? The big question, though, is that they're unemployed now. They all became unemployed in 2008 and 2009. Since 2009, unemployment hasn't been growing fast enough to diminish this number, but they weren't unemployed back in 2007. If it really is the case that we have 12 million workers who have not been properly educated and socialized and so have a zero marginal product because we can't find anything for them to do, why were they all employed back in 2006 and 2007? The answer to that is that, well, back in 2007, we employed them all building houses because we thought houses were very valuable things, and so we needed a lot more of them. Now we discover that no, houses aren't terribly valuable things, especially if they're in the desert between Los Angeles and Albuquerque, and we really don't need them. And thus now there are 12 million workers are no longer pounding nails in Nevada. There's nothing that anyone is willing to pay them for, because we used to think they had a high marginal product working in construction. Now we know that they don't. The only job at which they might possibly have been able to earn their keep was construction. We've recognized they can't. That's why this 12 million oversupply of excess workers has emerged relatively quickly. Problem with that is that employment in construction has only fallen by 2 million, according to payroll reports from the U.S. Department of Labor. And of this decline in 2 million, perhaps 500,000 are people who have gone back to Mexico, who were immigrants from Mexico, whether legal ones or illegal ones who were using someone else's social security number when they got reported to the statistical system, meaning that of the 12 million excess unemployed currently here in the United States, something like only 1.5 million can be attributed to the decline in construction employment. Where do the other 10.5 million come from? Why is it that even if we do have 1.5 million structurally unemployed, zero marginal product workers created by the decline in the construction sector, why is it that that's carried an extra 10.5 million employed along with it? Don't the other 10.5 million have skills? They seem to have perfectly good skills doing whatever they were doing back in 2006 and 2007. Why is it that for each one construction job that vanishes, we have 8 or 7 other jobs vanishing in the economy as a whole? That seems to me to be a decisive argument against the idea that we now have a high unemployment because we've recognized that we have a bunch of workers who have essentially nothing they can do that's worth doing. That's the first. The second and related view is that it's not that there's nothing they can do. It's not that we have 12 million workers who don't have the skills and the mental attitude and the willingness to show up to make it worth anyone's while to pay them to do anything, but that rather we do have a bunch of workers whose skills are in the wrong jobs. That we have a large number of unemployed workers, and they don't have the skills to get the jobs in the industries that are currently expanding, and so we need to retrain them. And retraining workers, it takes a lot of time, because you have to shift them out of the job they used to do into the jobs that are now potentially highly productive. And the question you ask of people, primarily I suppose Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank President Mariana Cocher-Lakota, who are big pushers of this structural unemployment theory, is if there are expanding industries that are having a hard time finding workers, we should be able to see them. We should see a lot of vacancies in the economy, as there are a bunch of expanding industries that want to hire workers but can't find any qualified workers to hire because the people fired from the shrinking sectors have not yet been retrained. And we should see a bunch of wage increases, even if not in the economy as a whole, although we should see it in the economy as a whole as the trained and skilled workers get bid away from their other jobs. We should be seeing a bunch of wage increases, at least in the expanding industries that are short of labor because they can't find qualified workers. And where are they? Job openings. Job openings are a good 600,000 above their absolute minimum mid-2009 trough, but job openings are still way, way below their normal non-recession level. You can't look at this job openings graph and say that we have an economy with a greater than usual number of job openings in it because the workers we have aren't properly equipped to take the jobs that are open in expanding industries. You can't say that there's a lot of upward pressure on people's wages, when back 4 years ago your average wage increased by 4% in dollars in a year, by 2% in real terms, and now average wage increases are kissing zero in real terms. The world that the structural unemployment people see is a world in which there are a lot of vacancies in America today, and in which there's a lot of upward pressure on wages as businesses that see market opportunities but can't find workers offer to pay more, and to pay more at an accelerated rate to get more workers into their particular firms. We're just not seeing that either. Overaccumulation of capital. This is the oldest alternative theory of all. This was a favorite of Chicago economist Friedrich Hayek. It was the theory on which Andrew Mellon and Herbert Hoover ran the U.S. economy at the start of the Great Depression. It actually dates all the way back to Karl Marx, who talked about how economists like John Stuart Mill and the politicians they advised like Robert Peel think that you can deal with a financial crisis and a depression by this simple game of monetary policy. By a form of financial three-card Monty by which the central bank increases the liquidity so the high-quality asset stock in the economy. And no, you can't, said Marx, because even though the appearance of the crisis is that it starts in the financial sector, it's actually a real crisis, and it's a real crisis produced by the fact that use values are separated from exchange values, and that the fetishism of commodities means that the investment process is guaranteed to run awry and produce much too much capital for a market economy to effectively use. That is, a market economy can only run at full employment if the surplus value earned by, or the surplus value received by employers is then plowed back into investing to increase their capital stock. But if the surplus value is then invested in increasing the capital stock, well then who are you going to sell the next round of increased production to? Well, there has to be even more surplus value in the future. The workers aren't getting any higher incomes. And eventually the thing will come into a crash with a big valorization crisis when some manufacturers and some producers say, hey, wait a minute, buying to increase our factories because we think that there'll be more demand in the future. Where is the demand from consumers coming from? There is no more demand from consumers. We should stop investing. And then you have a big crash because you've overaccumulated capital, because you have too much capital in the economy to support demand at the then current level of productivity, distribution of income, and surplus value. Marx thought that the answer to this was the national socialization of private property, the elimination of the bourgeoisie as a class, and the creation of a free society of associated producers. And this was the reason that Marx thought the capitalist system should be ended as quickly as possible. Mellon and Hayek and Hoover tended to say, well, this is a drawback to what otherwise is a pretty good system, and when the crisis comes because of the overaccumulation of capital, you just got to suffer through it and accept that high unemployment for a while is a price that you've got to pay for all the good things the market produces. There have always seemed to me to be two big questions here. Right? The first is Paul Krugman's question, which is to follow the argument of the Marx, Mellon, Hayek, Hoover axis. The big problem is that the economy has too much capital, and too many people are working on making capital goods. And so they have to get unemployed, and when they get unemployed, they lose their jobs, and when they lose their jobs, their incomes fall, and you get a recession. But the root cause is there's too much capital. And the people working in capital goods sectors have to lose their jobs. Krugman says it's okay, sometimes the economy gets too much capital, but also there are times when the economy has too much consumption goods as well. Right? When there's not an overaccumulation of capital, but instead an overproduction of consumption goods. And people really go to the marketplace and they say, I really don't want to buy these extra, I don't know what, Ferraris. I want to save some money in the future. And then when there's too great a level, there's an overproduction of consumption goods, well, then what happens is the people making consumption goods have to lose their jobs and go find jobs someplace else. But whenever there's an overproduction of consumption goods, whenever there's too little savings in the economy relative to planned investments, you don't get a recession. Instead, you get a boom. There's no period of high unemployment that follows the redeployment of workers from consumption goods to capital goods industries. There's only high unemployment that accompanies the switching of workers out of capital goods and into consumption goods industries. And Paul Krugman has always thought, and I've agreed, that this is a decisive argument against the overaccumulation of capital theory. Besides, what evidence is there for a current capital surplus? You look at private construction spending in the United States, say since the 80s, so since the early 1990s. And, it's growing nicely and smoothly, and then we get the big housing bubble. And it is indeed true. We have this large orange triangle up here, which is the building of housing and other buildings over and above trend that we saw during the period of irrational exuberance and excessive leverage, and then the housing bubble crashed. And then you get this large trapezoid, during which housing production is depressed below its trend level. And by now, no matter how you do the trend, this trapezoid here is bigger than this triangle. The housing market has spent more years depressed by more than it spent elevated back during the boom. We don't have a surplus of houses relative to trend, we have a shortage. Admittedly, we don't have the houses we would really want. What we'd really want to have would be a lot more two-bedroom condos in Venice Beach, where you can actually get somewhere in LA within a reasonable period of time, rather than a huge number of five-bedroom houses with swimming pools out somewhere beyond Riverside and San Bernardino, where it's not possible to get anywhere in less than 4. You might want to be in less than 4 hours, unless you really like the desert. But the fact that a bunch of our houses are in the wrong place, that should mean that we'd be more eager to build houses, and not less. The idea that we have an overaccumulation of capital is simply wrong. What we have is we have a high housing vacancy rate because a lot of people have lost their jobs and so are doubling up in their apartments with their relatives, not because we have in any sense built too many houses. And so even at the empirical level, the overaccumulation of capital theory seems to me simply not to fly. Fourth, we have the idea, and I don't know any, well, maybe John Taylor at Stanford, who I think really wants a job in the next Republican administration, too much. Maybe John Taylor at Stanford would back this one, but this is one you hear almost exclusively from politicians, which is that it's uncertainty, that there's been an enormous increase in uncertainty since the election of Obama. And because there's been this enormous increase in uncertainty due to government deficits and overregulation, which makes businesses cut back on their spending. And we can't get spending up again until we do something to make businesses less uncertain about the future. And here, I'd say there are 3 questions that are decisive. The first is if businesses are uncertain and are worried about overregulation and overtaxation, shouldn't they be saying so? Here at the bottom, we have the National Federation of Independent Businesses, percent of small businesses in its survey, naming each issue as the single most important problem since 1986. The green stuff up above are taxes. The proportion of businesses labeling, saying that high taxes are our most important problem. And it fluctuates between 20 and 30%. Rising, say, to 30% at the start of Clinton's second term, falling to 20% after Bush's number 2 tax cut, doing a bizarre dip in early 2007. I think because a bunch of the people answering the survey were watching Fox News and thought that somehow the fact that Nancy Pelosi was now Speaker of the House meant their taxes had gone up, and that they must be suffering from higher taxes because there was this Democrat sitting in the Speaker's chair, and everyone knew she wanted to raise taxes even though she was unable to. And overregulation, government requirements, this as well. Insurance cost is this thing you really can't see because massive failure of